Welcome back to Indiana Sports Beat, of course, coming to you from the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios. And, man, I could not be any more excited right now than to tell you we're getting the opportunity to talk to Mr. George McGinnis. George, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fine. Thank you.
I had the opportunity to run into Mr. McGinnis a few weeks ago at the All-Star game, and he was there, one of the many people being acknowledged, but one of the most well-known names. How is it something that you just don't even think about? But George McGinnis is one of the most well-known names in the most prominent basketball state in the country. That's got to be a pretty cool thing.
Well, yeah. I mean, I grew up embracing Indiana basketball as a young boy. I got to see the 1950, 56, 57 Christmas Addicts High School team win the state championship. That's the first time we had a TV, and I just got hooked on it, just watching that celebration. So the next day we were all just, took to the alleys of wherever we could go to find a hoop to start shooting. And then, of course, guys like Rick Mount came along. And Rick, when we were in high school, as I was a freshman, but there were some sophomores and juniors on the team, and they drove. So we would get in one of the cars that the guys had and drive up to Lebanon just to see that sign, Lebanon, home of Rick Mount, because he was the first high school kid to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated. So, yeah, I was fully engulfed in Indiana basketball.
And, man, yeah. And you talk about those days you were talking about, man, that's back in the Oscar Robertson days. It's amazing to me how unbelievable the amount of talent that this state has produced for a long time and still does to this day. But we're talking some of the greatest ever. George McGinnis is one of those names. Oscar Robertson, one of those names. Larry Bird. It's incredible that they all come from this little state.
Oh, yeah. We've had, throughout the history of the game, at every level, there's always been great Indiana players that have played and done really, really well, represented the state very well. So, yeah, I totally get it. And I think there is as many kids from Indiana playing in the NBA today as there ever has been and thriving, like Oladipo and folks like that.
Yeah, and I love the history of Indiana basketball, and I'm talking about the state. And I think about some of those high school teams that you just talked about. I mean, the ones you were on, my gosh, you were on that great George Washington team. You had was it Steve Green that was on there with you? Or Steve Downing. Steve Downing that was on there with you?
Yeah,
but you had Oscar Robertson before that. Yeah. I went to Floyd Central High School. They made the Final Four the year after you were there, but they had like 3 or 4 guys, Division I guys on there, but the team they played was East Chicago, which had all those guys that went to UCLA and Stoddard and Princeton baseball. Just the amount of athletes is crazy from that period.
Yeah, that was a lot of great teams during that era. But Floyd Central was a basketball powerhouse. They have a storied history in Indiana basketball.
But and just such great times. But then you're such almost a savant at the game. I mean, what you were able to do. You were kind of ahead of your time. You were like, as was Dr. J, kind of those guys that were ahead of their time. What led you to be like that, to play like that? Because you did things that people weren't doing.
Yeah, well, I was a big guy who could handle the ball, could pass it, things of that nature. But I learned from just coaches in high school, Jerry Oliver, Bill Green, who 6 state championships to win in his high school coach in Indiana history. When you play for guys like that, you learn a lot about the game. So they didn't hold me back. They let me use what talent I had. And that involved doing a number of different things. So I was very fortunate.
And you have played, you talk about, we can start at the pros and go backwards, but all the way back to high school, you've been fortunate also to play with some incredible talent from the jump.
Oh, no question. Yeah, I mean, every team I played on, even when we were in junior high school, we we were seemed to be much bigger than all the kids that we played against. But Steve Downey, as a freshman at Washington, was only 5'10", and as a senior he was 6'9". So he grew a foot in high school almost, and but he had some growing pains in the middle there his sophomore year. But his junior and senior year, he really came around and became one of the great high school players in Indiana. So, yeah, and then we had Jim Arnold, we had Wayne Pack, we had a great team. So we were favored to win. So there was a lot of pressure on us. And, Marion gave us one heck of a go in the Final Four, and probably should have beaten us, but we got pretty lucky in the last couple of minutes of that game.
But back then, when you guys were the best team in the state, but what kind of pressure was on you as a player, as an African-American kid back then in that time? I mean, there's all kinds of things that are going on around you.
Yeah. Well, I didn't see as much of the racial stuff like Oscar Robertson did. It was because of guys like him and teams like Addix and his coach and all the administrators over at Addix who kind of paved the way for guys like myself and other African Americans who played. So I didn't have a lot of obstacles in front of me. So I would just kind of put my blinkers on, and my coaches told me to play, and that's what I did.
How tough was it going undefeated?
Well, you know what? I'll tell you what made it easy, and here was the key. Our junior year, we got beat by Shortridge because we were favored to win the state that year. And Shortridge came and played a real slow game and shot the ball every 2-3 minutes, and they ended up upsetting us and winning. They went to the state finals, and, of course, they lost to a Gary team. Then the following year, Jerry Oliver went to Indiana University to become an assistant coach. Bill Green got the head job at Washington High School because of that. And he called us all in. And he said, guys, this is going to be one of the great teams of all time. He says, I'll make a deal with you. For every game that you win, we play Fridays and Saturday nights now. Every game that you win, we'll take you to White Castle, and you can eat 10 White Castles apiece.
I was cheap back in.
Yeah, and that was inspiring. So we went 31-0.
Fueled by White Castle. The news is out. It was fueled by White Castle.
Oh, really?
No, I'm just saying, yeah, the story's out now on you guys. Your championship was fueled by White Castle burgers.
Oh, yeah, I think a lot of people know that story. It was a great incentive, and we loved it. So even after we went and won the state championship, everybody wanted to go to some big dinner. We said, no, we'll just go to White Castle. We'll go to our regular place and eat there. So it was a lot of fun, man. So we still get together and talk about those days. I mean, I see Steve probably once every 3 weeks. I talk to him almost every day, as well as some of the other guys on my high school team. So we're still very close, and it's funny to reminisce about some of those things.
And a great player he was as well. It's amazing you guys were on the same high school team. It's almost not even fair. I mean, you had two incredible players there.
Right.
And you finish your high school career and then you go on to Indiana. What was back then? What was the draw to Indiana? Was it the former coach that had moved over there? Was Indiana? They had won a couple national championships at that time, but I think the last one was in the 50s. What was the draw to IU at that time?
Well, I mean, I had always loved Indiana basketball. I loved watching them play. I loved the way they played, how they ran up and down, and all the great players and great shooters they had over the years. And I was honored that they went and recruited me really, really hard. Lou Watson, who was the coach back then. And so it was good. Now, you know, freshmen couldn't play back then, so I spent a year just kind of, playing intramural ball and that kind of thing. But it was an enjoyable deal because my dad, who got killed in a construction accident right after my last Indiana-Kentucky game was played in the high school All-Star game. My dad fell from a building and was killed. So I wanted to stay close to home, especially because my mom and, I was worried about her. And so it really worked out well.
And you go to Indiana, and because freshmen weren't eligible, the sophomore year you get to play, and of course you light it up, average 30 points a game, all Big Ten, all American, all world for that matter. But that's the only season you get to play at Indiana, and I'm assuming a lot of that was because of the passing of your father.
Yeah. I mean, we were very poor, didn't have anything. My mother and father was from the South, and my dad was a laborer and worked in a factory at night. He worked 2 jobs. And so it was just a way to kind of help my mother out of her situation. I didn't want to see her have to suffer anymore. My dad had bought his first house, and there was a lot of obligations that she was under that put a lot of pressure on her. So, it was a quick way for me to kind of help put her in a position where she was not only comfortable but stressed. When the stress wasn't there as much. So, and I was able to do that. And the house I bought her, she still lives in that house today. And every time I go there, it makes me so proud to know that, she's still in that little house and she still loves it,
We're talking with basketball. Welcome back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios. We are so fortunate to be talking to an absolute legend, George McGinnis. Was there ever a time where you wondered what it would have been? Because obviously you didn't play for Bob Knight. Bob Knight comes into IU right after you leave, ironically. Ever wondered what it would have been like with you there and Knight there at the same time?
Well, he'd have been tough to play for. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think every player who's played for him has said that. But you know what? He embraced me. He was nice to me. He invited me down to games. He invited me to a Final Four. He was very encouraging and kind. The one thing I do think about is 1974 when they made it to the Final Four and played UCLA. And Steve Downing got a really bad call against him, against the big center, Bill Walton. And I thought, man, I would have loved to have been on that team if I think I could have made a difference, because I think they had 2 forwards, and Keith Wilkes and the other guy, and each one of them was like 6'5" and 6'6". So I would have brought some size and some physicality to the table. So, but they still done well. Coach Knight, he was amazing. But I ended up okay, and he ended up okay too.
Oh, absolutely. I'd say. You know who else was on that UCLA team? A guy named Pete Turgovich, who played for East Chicago, Washington, who won the state championship the year after you did. I'm too young to know that much stuff, George. I'm too young to know that stuff. Yeah,
on that team, but he didn't play a whole lot that particular year. I don't know if he played much a year or two after that. I think he got more time, but in that particular game and up to that game, I don't think he played much, but he was a dynamic high school player for sure.
Well, you were a dynamic high school player, dynamic college player. Then you move on because of the circumstances to the pro level. And then it's the ABA, not the NBA. And the ABA was such a unique organization then. And it gave a lot more guys the opportunity to play pro basketball.
Absolutely. And again, there was an organization right here in Indianapolis that already had set forth a winning tradition. And, I was drawn to that. I would go and sneak in the Coliseum and watch games back in the day. We watch Roger Brown and all those guys, Freddie Lewis, Billy Keller. and it was nice to see that Indianapolis had a pro team. So when they called me, I was very interested in hearing what they had to say.
And then you guys ended up winning a couple championships while you were there with the Pacers.
Right.
Some big battles with the Kentucky Colonels back then. Dan Issel, Louis Dampier, Artis Gilmore, Dr. J in the ABA. Man, that league was phenomenal.
Well, think about this. I think they merged in '76. I think that. I'm not quite sure.
Yes, that is correct.
That year, I think the ABA players made up at least almost a third, if not close to half, of the All-Stars for that year. So, it was just a league that was unique, had great players, and we were fun to watch because we played a wide open game like you see today, where these guys are shooting threes and scoring a lot of points. That's a much more fun way, I think, to watch basketball, and that's what the ABA offered. Now, the NBA didn't like the ABA very well because obviously we were competitors, but the ABA brought a lot to the table, and when they merged, that all come to light. All the great players in the ABA were all pro, made the All-Star teams. They just dominated.
Was there any animosity between the current NBA players and when you guys came over and made that merger?
I don't think so, because I think players know. They know when they see another player who can play. They usually will acknowledge it to themselves. So George Gervin Jr. serving. Issel, Gilmore, you just go down the line with great players, and all of them are Hall of Famers. All of them in the Hall of Fame. So the ABA made a great contribution to basketball, and I was glad to be a part of that.
Absolutely. I don't know what the NBA would be like without the ABA having been a part of it at that time, because it seemed to give them a shot of adrenaline, and you talk about doing things that other people weren't doing. You guys were playing a wide open style, like you said, and it gave a lot more fan interaction. It made the game a lot more fun for the fans, I think.
Yeah, finally at the All-Star game, they added a slam dunk contest. They added a three-point shooting contest. They added a skills contest. These are all things that were started and done by the ABA. And the NBA just kind of started doing the same thing, and it turned into a real big fan favorite.
Didn't the three-point shot begin with the ABA?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Three-point shot, the dunk contest, all that stuff that you see they're doing today in the NBA All-Star Game started back in the old ABA.
Nuts.
Yeah. So,
do you get a chance to follow the game today? And when you do, is it the NBA you follow, the college game? What is it that you like to follow?
I like college. I'm a big IU fan. I still watch him. I don't get too many games down there, but I do like to watch him on TV. I was sorry to hear that Romeo had hurt his hand that restricted some of his playing. I know something was going on with him. He just didn't look right, But he was fun to watch, and with this new coach and everything, I think they're going to be fine. It's just getting some players and get them into the system integrated. But yeah, I've been an IU fan for a long time, and will continue to be one.
Well, they could probably use a George McGinnis or two. That would certainly do a lot of good for them. There's no doubt about that.
No, they can use a couple of Oladipos down there. Is what they need.
And you talked about Romeo, just drafted by the Boston Celtics. I mean, I can't think of a better place for Romeo to go than Boston, mainly because of Brad Stevens and the kind of coach he is. But I think that's just a perfect place for him.
Well, this the kid understands the game. He's really unselfish. He plays team ball, and that is a perfect situation for him up in Boston. And I think he'll thrive there because the fans are incredible. Again, Brad Stevens, he gets to play for him, and I think he's in about as good a position as he can be in as he takes this journey through his NBA career.
Going from college to the pro level, I know it's been there's a different game between then and now. What differences do you see, though, between the pro game now and when you were playing? Besides, it's just the guys are a little faster.
Well, they're just better athletes, much better condition, they're just twice the athletes that we were. The NBA it's a full-time league, what we call, we would take off in the summer. As a matter of fact, when I was with the Pacers in 1972, there were 4 guys on our team that had summer jobs. So it was, you didn't make a ton of money. Some of the guys didn't. So you had to work and supplement your salary. But, now with the guys making the kind of money they're making, they're able to, have trainers and nutritionists and things like that. So they stay in shape year round, and they almost have to stay competitive because there's always young guns coming into the league looking to, make a reputation. The kid from North Carolina, from Duke, Zion, he's amazing. It'll be interesting to see how he does in the NBA, but he's an incredible talent.
George, you talk about having to work a second job back then. The money was not what it is today, obviously. Leaps and bound differences. On the college level, there's talk now of ways of trying to pay players. Either in California is possibly about to pass a law that will allow them to profit from their own likeness, their own name, which I don't see a problem with. But the NCAA has said, no, you can't do that. But what are your feelings on that as a college athlete with today, the way the game has changed and the money that is made now?
Well, I think something definitely needs to be done. You get a lot of kids who are playing basketball. I know a lot of them come from backgrounds where economically they come from a tough situation. Mother and father are struggling, and they can't afford to even come to a game. If they live in another state, they can't afford a ticket. So that to me is something wrong with that. When I played, there were nights, there was no training table and all that stuff that they have now. There were nights I went to bed, I was hungry, and it didn't happen often, but it happened a few times because I remember them. I always know when I'm hungry. But there should be some mechanism in place where you can give these kids a few $100s a month or whatever, and they can, like a stipend, and they can go out and do whatever they want with it, go eat or go to a movie or do whatever, and then be able to fly the parents into games to see them. I'm all for that, but I don't think kids should be getting rich in college. College is an experience. My dog is going crazy.
That's all right.
I'm sorry.
It's George McGinnis' dog. He can do whatever he wants.
Yeah. But that's kind of the way I feel about it. I do think that they should be getting something.
Well, Mr. McGinnis, I cannot thank you enough. I so appreciate the opportunity to get to talk to you. One of the, not the greatest ball player in the history of the state of Indiana, the most decorated, no doubt. But thank you so much for your time. I look forward to hopefully doing this again. Maybe when the college season rolls around, we can talk a little college hoops.
Yep. You bet. You just call me anytime. Thanks so much.
Wow, George McGinnis, again, an Indiana legend, heck, just a basketball legend, period. So fortunate, so lucky, and so honored to have the opportunity to talk to Mr. McGinnis today. But that's going to wrap it up for us today. We appreciate you joining us. We'll be back with more Indiana Sports Beat tomorrow, of course, coming to you from the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios. I'm Jim Coyle, and I will see you on the radio.